ваш метр квадратный.
Кофе, пробуждающий желание.
Я могу быть душой и телом на Камчатке, а деньгами в Москве, Сочи или, например, в Владивостоке. Просто беру, открываю вклад не там, где привык, а там, где выгоднее. И могу это сделать откуда угодно, на финуслугах.
Зарегистрируйся один раз и открывай вклады от разных банков. 10% эксклюзивно на первой платформе личных финансов финуслуги от Моекс Групп.
Цени свои деньги.
Чем дольше, тем выгодней! Оплачивайте сразу несколько месяцев и получайте скидку. Чем дольше, тем выгоднее. Мегафон начинается с тебя.
2 Big Tasty, 3 сыра. Всего за 499 рублей.
Возьми кредит наличными в банке Уралсиб по ставке всего от 5 и 9% годовых. Здравствуйте, я Сергей Станкевич. Мы вновь вглядываемся в наш календарь больших событий, повествующий о том, как мы в конце прошлого века переходили от Советского Союза к новой России. Сегодня речь пойдет о том, как в 80-е годы прошлого века в СССР вернулся парламентаризм, и что нам тогда принесло это, казалось бы, навсегда забытое понятие. История показывает, что всякий предельно централизованный и жестко управляемый сверху государственный строй обычно нетерпим к парламенту. Веками монархиям всего света была чужда сама идея о том, что подданные имеют право посылать своих выбранных представителей в некий государственный орган, способный в чем-то ограничивать верховную власть. В начале 20 века парламентаризм пришел в Российскую империю в виде Государственной Думы. Это произошло тоже в разгар революции 1905-1907 годов. Допустив Конституцию и парламентаризм, российское самодержавие попыталось модернизировать государственное управление, приспособить его к новому веку и сделать революцию ненужной. Государственная Дума в составе Российской империи, при всей ограниченности ее полномочий, смогла утвердиться в качестве вполне дееспособного парламента. Она сделала немало полезного для страны. В частности, санкционировала важнейшие столыпинские реформы.
And the most important electrolyte? That's the question for today. Well, So why is potassium the most important electrolyte? That's the question for today. Well, let's just take a look at 4 main electrolytes. We have K+, which is the chemical symbol for potassium. We need 4,700 milligrams. Then we have sodium, which is Na+, 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams. Then we have calcium, Ca. We need 1,000 milligrams. And the magnesium, we only need 420 milligrams. So we can see that we need 10 times as much potassium than we do magnesium. And with sodium, we need twice as much potassium. And with calcium, we need 4 times as much. So why do we need so much potassium? Well, first of all, what is an electrolyte? An electrolyte is an electrically charged mineral. When you take an electrolyte and you put it in water, it separates and becomes conductive to electricity. So our bodies use electrolytes for various things, to help conduct nerve impulses, to help you contract and relax muscles, to help maintain pH in the body, as well as to help push fluid through the body. 30% of all the energy in our body comes from this little pump called the sodium-potassium pump. But I do have to say that the definition for pump is slightly different than the pump that you probably have down in your basement as the sump pump. This is a biological definition. It means the mechanism for movement of electrolytes through the cell membrane, okay? So that's a little bit different than just a pump pushing fluid somewhere. So 30% of all the energy that you have, whether it's digesting or thinking etc. 30% of all that energy comes from this sodium-potassium pump. So the purpose of this pump is to basically keep sodium out and keep potassium in. So it's keeping these two minerals separated, okay? That's the purpose of this pump. Anytime you have two different minerals which are electrically charged in a different way, okay, you form a battery. So with a battery, you have a positive and a negative. There's a difference in this electrical charge, and that allows for energy to be maintained. So the purpose of this pump is to maintain cellular energy. So your cells are basically batteries. And the battery is there to help generate nerve impulses, which happen to be connected to muscles. So it's activating the muscles. You have electrical impulses that are actually changing the muscle rhythm. Then we need energy to have the muscles contract and relax and help regulate the pH of the body. And one purpose of that is to allow enzymes to work. So for example, there are certain enzymes that actually work in different pHs. So if your digestive system is the wrong pH, that enzyme won't work. Let's take the stomach, for example. You have this extremely powerful protein enzyme called peptase, right? And that enzyme is activated when the stomach reaches a certain pH level. If the stomach never reaches that pH level, and then the enzyme never becomes activated, and then you don't digest protein. So the pH is very, very important. And the stomach is greatly dependent on potassium for its pH and its ability to digest protein. All right, and then we have fluid balance. If you don't have enough potassium, guess what? Your ankles are going to swell up with fluid. Sometimes when you see people with sandals, they have these indentations around the sandals where they have all this puffy fluid. And I just want to walk up to them and tell them, just take some potassium. All that fluid will completely go away, probably within a few hours. But I have to withhold myself from doing that because sometimes people consider that rude. All right, so what does potassium do? Well, it keeps us energetic, okay? It gives us endurance when we exercise. If you're low in potassium, you will not be able to go as far when you exercise. It also prevents cramping, like the cramps that you get in your calves or your feet. Now, it could also be magnesium as well. Also, potassium is necessary to prevent arrhythmias, okay, which is part of the pacemaker of your heart. It also helps prevent twitching, tremors, constipation, because you have this, it's called peristalsis, this pumping action through your colon, which is controlled by the nervous system and the muscular system. So without potassium, you don't get this pumping action through the colon and things just kind of sit there. Also, potassium is necessary to prevent vascular calcification. So potassium is definitely needed in the regulation of calcium. Now, without potassium, you get insomnia, you can't sleep. So potassium is a physiological tranquilizer. It relaxes the body much like magnesium does. So let's just say, for example, you're deficient in potassium for some reason. You're going to lay there on the pillow and try to get to sleep, but your heart's going to be pounding faster. You're going to feel your muscles more tense. You're not going to be able to get into that relaxed state. All right, the next thing is insulin resistance. I have a lot of videos on this topic. Potassium is needed to prevent insulin resistance. In fact, if you take a diabetic or a pre-diabetic or someone with insulin resistance, they're always deficient in potassium. So potassium will help your blood sugars. It will help lessen this insulin resistance. And insulin in the cell allows certain nutrients to go inside and fuel. So anything that inhibits this insulin function stops the absorption of nutrients and fuel into the cells. So this is just another reason why potassium is important in blood sugars. Now, you also have stored glucose. That's called glycogen. Glycogen is a string of glucose molecules which also have with it a string of potassium molecules. So in order for glucose to be stored in the liver and the muscle, you also need potassium. And without the potassium, you don't store glycogen as well. And so if you don't store glycogen, the body then starts storing more fat instead of stored sugar. And so potassium is involved in a lot of different aspects of your blood sugars. When you go on the ketogenic diet, the requirement for this glycogen goes down. So you're not going to need to store as much glycogen. The same thing goes with when you do intermittent fasting. So you're not eating, so your body is then running on ketones, so you're not running on glucose, so you don't need as much of this. So this kind of goes away. So you're basically burning it up and it's not replaced as much, especially in your liver, after about 1 to 2 days. And so what happens is you're going to lose a lot of glycogen, glucose, and you're also going to lose potassium. This is why when you start on the ketogenic diet, you need to take a potassium supplement. I always recommend one in electrolytes so you have all of them, not just potassium. All right, the next thing that potassium does is it helps to prevent high blood pressure. If someone has high blood pressure, the easiest thing to do is just to increase the potassium in their body, and it usually will come down. The other cause of high blood pressure is low vitamin I thought high blood pressure was caused by high sodium, okay? Well, you need sodium and potassium in the right ratios. So instead of lowering sodium, which by the way you need a certain amount of sodium for a lot of reasons, why not increase potassium? Because yes, you might have too much sodium, but in reality, you just don't have enough potassium to deal with that sodium. So these people that are salt sensitive usually are just potassium deficient. All right, and another common myth that I've heard is that you don't want to take potassium because it's very toxic to the kidney. That's false information. In fact, potassium protects your kidneys unless you have stage 5 kidney failure, in which case you have to avoid a lot of different nutrients. But if you don't have end-stage kidney failure, potassium is actually beneficial for the kidneys. And I'm going to put a link down below for those people who have not heard that information before. In fact, potassium citrate is good for preventing kidney stones. It's also good to prevent gout, which is uric acid crystals. So potassium is actually very, very good for a lot of different things. Now, I already mentioned this, it prevents edema and swelling. If you have swelling, usually you have an imbalance of too much sodium and not enough potassium. When you take sufficient potassium, it's like a diuretic. If you have fluid retention, you will get rid of that excess fluid. All right, I already mentioned this. Potassium counters sodium toxicity. Also, I already mentioned that it helps you make stomach acid, and I also mentioned it helps prevent gout because potassium citrate is alkaline, and if you keep the pH correct and don't allow your pH to become too acidic, you won't have these uric acid crystals coming out of solution aggravating your big toe. All right, so now the question is, why are we deficient in potassium? Well, the number one reason is because of diet. The average person only consumes about a cup and a half of vegetables every single day. Okay, a cup and a half. Well, where in food would you get a lot of rich potassium? Bananas, right? Well, in a banana, it's only 300 milligrams. We need 4,700 milligrams. So if we do the math, you would need 15.6 bananas per day to reach your 4,700 requirement. Now, the problem with bananas is they come with too much sugar. So bananas are not the best source. The best source would be leafy greens, okay? And yes, you need at least 7 to 10 cups to contribute to this amount, but realize also other food will contribute. So it's not just the salad. There's even potassium in certain things like salmon, for example. And there's potassium in nuts and seeds and nut butters. And so there's other sources of potassium, but the leafy greens have a good amount. And it's fairly easy to eat big salads. Now, when I say 1 cup, I'm talking about like a small handful, which is like 1 ounce. So you need like a bowl of salad. You could do one for your lunch, and then you could do one for your dinner to make it really easy. But I did a video on showing you the amount, so I will put that link down below. Now, avocados are loaded with potassium. 1 avocado is roughly about 700, sometimes 800 milligrams of potassium. So avocados are really good. Now, I don't recommend going out and getting a potassium supplement unless there's a higher amount of potassium like an electrolyte powder, because typically the supplements for potassium only come in 99 milligrams, okay? So you would need like what, 47 pills every single day, and that's not very practical. So I recommend you try as much as you can to get it from your diet, or get a good electrolyte powder that has enough of these electrolytes. Number 2, if you are vomiting, you're going to lose your potassium. If you have diarrhea, you can lose your potassium. Diuretics are notorious for becoming potassium deficient. I mean, it's kind of wild that here you are taking a drug for your high blood pressure when that is going to deplete your potassium and create a higher amount of blood pressure. Doesn't make sense to me. Okay, stress. When you have stress, you deplete your potassium reserves. And by the way, when you actually take potassium, it relaxes your nervous system. It pulls you out of this stress state. Sugar depletes your potassium. Real quick, I have to tell this story. My wife and I, years ago, right before we were getting married, we went to shop around for wedding cakes, okay? And we were sampling wedding cakes, and we were eating sugar all day. This is before I had any awareness on healthy foods at all. So we ended up that night at an Italian restaurant, and we had pasta, pizza, we had bread, we had wine. We were carved out, right? And then we looked up, and everyone was gone in the restaurant except us. And except another guy was going past us with the dessert trays, all the different desserts. They were actually going to toss them. And he wanted to know if we wanted to sample some before he tossed them. And of course, I don't like to see food go to waste, so I started to dive in and started consuming as much additional dessert as I can cram into my mouth. Now, as I was driving home that night, I remember I feeling kind of weird. So I got home, I went to bed, tried to go to bed, and I started to hear this pounding in my ears, like boom, 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 boom. Going, what is going on? I had no idea. That was a severe potassium deficiency caused by consuming a tremendous amount of refined grains and sugar, okay? So all this refined grain and sugar literally depletes you of potassium and starts to accelerate the heart rate. My heart rate was literally going so high, my heart was pounding out of my chest, okay? I didn't sleep 1 minute. If I would have known what I know now back then, I would have just either took some potassium or had a big salad to try to replenish some of this lost potassium. Perfect example of low potassium. All right, when you do keto, you need to take potassium because you're going to lose fluid, which you're going to then lose potassium. When you drink alcohol, you can deplete your body of potassium. When you consume excessive fluids, so some people drink gallons of fluid while they're working out and they're sweating too, and they're losing not just their sodium electrolyte, they're also losing their potassium. So they're going to become very dehydrated and feel dizzy and weak. And so when you drink gallons of water, you better be drinking your electrolytes at the same time, but not just potassium, sodium too. And I mentioned the sweating right here. Okay, diabetes. Diabetics need or require more potassium, and they're usually always deficient in potassium because of this insulin resistance thing. So potassium is very, very important for diabetics, especially. Yet they're just retaining sodium like crazy in fluid without the potassium. All right, then we have fasting. Now the thing about fasting is when you're fasting, especially prolonged fasting, sometimes you're not able to store some of these electrolytes for a long period of time. So if you're deficient, you know, whether it's magnesium or potassium going into a fast, and you're not consuming anything, no electrolytes, then it's exaggerated. You can feel dizzy, you can pass out. So this is why when you fast, I recommend taking electrolytes. All right, so now that you know about potassium, let's show you the video that I mentioned about consuming enough salad. I put it right here, check it out.
В эту среду 2 твистера делюкс по цене одного. Купон 5050.
A warm welcome to today's talk. It's Tuesday the 1st of February. Now we're going to be thinking about vaccine mandates and the science about that, because I can't say whether President Biden's right or wrong with his vaccine mandates for healthcare workers, but we can look at some of the science which will raise some legitimate questions, I think, about this. Just before we go, a warm welcome to this talk. It's Thursday the 3rd of February. Just a few thoughts today really on the radically different approaches being taken by different countries. Now, let's start with a quiz. Which country has managed this pandemic best? What do you think? What would you answer? Which country's really acquitted itself best out of all the, let's say, the westernised wealthy countries? I think it's Denmark. I mean, of course, it's subjective. We can't say which is which, but Denmark's done extraordinarily well. So I want to look at that a bit this morning, because yesterday, as you probably know, they've abandoned all restrictions. Interesting, in the light of very high infection rates, of course, so this really is quite an interesting topic to discuss. Now, before we do that, I just want to look at New Zealand. So here's the situation in New Zealand. Now, they're going to have a gradual reopening of borders to its citizens, workers and international travellers, kind of in that order. And they're going to do it gradually and slowly. Thousands of New Zealanders are still stranded abroad, they can't get home, so that they're going to be able to get home pretty soon now, which of course is great news for them. And they're going to fully reopen the border to non-citizens in October. So here we see New Zealand taking a very moderate, tempered, longitudinal approach to this virus, while completely, utterly ignoring the nature of the virus. As soon as you get some community Omicron spread, especially if it's BA2 in New Zealand, it's not going to say, oh, well, we better wait for the government, because they don't want full reopening until October. It's just going to go through the country like a tsunami. I really don't understand the thinking of the New Zealand government. You cannot. You can only go with the biology of this virus. You can't have it suiting your political convenience. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. So what I would say, if you're in New Zealand, you're going to be exposed to Omicron really any time now, because the community transmission will take off really very quickly as soon as the restrictions are at least partially lifted. And the idea that you can do this progressively just takes no cognizance at all of the reality of the science of this virus, as far as I can see. But there you go. So that's New Zealand. Let's go on now and look at new data confirmed cases per million people. So let's look at these graphics first of all. This really explains quite a bit. So now this first graphic here, cases in Denmark. Wow, they're way higher. Much higher than Australia, United States, United Kingdom, Canada. So let's just look at that. That's the green line going way off the scale for cases in Denmark. This is just an enlargement of that previous graphic, of course. Australia, United States, Canada, way below. Look at the cases in Denmark. They're actually off the scale. They're actually onto the next page because they're actually way up there. So they're reopening despite these very high levels of cases in Denmark, which of course is fascinating. Now, if we look at, one of the reasons I'm saying Denmark's done best, if we look at cumulative COVID-19 deaths per million, United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Denmark, way down at the bottom. Thankfully, Australia still very low as well, but of course they didn't get the infection until vaccination was reasonably ubiquitous in Australia. Now again, I just want to blow this up because this is the same scale. United States, United Kingdom in terms of cumulative deaths. Then we have this big to scale gap, Canada, and then Denmark. I mean, that is the difference in deaths between these countries. It really is quite an impressive performance from Denmark, really. So Denmark has put an end to all coronavirus-related laws. That's it. It's finished. Basically, Denmark is saying, right, pandemic's over, off you go, back to normal. As of yesterday, in fact. Basically just back to normal. We're not worrying about this anymore. So they're putting an end to all coronavirus-related laws. Danish government virus no longer deemed a critical threat to society. No longer a legal obligation to self-isolate if you test positive. BA2, of course, now dominates infections in Denmark. We don't have a recent percentage there. I'd be surprised if it's less than about 80% now, BA2. Of course, the rest is BA1. Omicron. So, Director of Infectious Preparedness, this is the National Institute, Infectious Disease. Disease Agency, SSI, in Denmark. There was nothing for
This is how it feels to build websites the old-fashioned way. This is how it feels to build websites the old-fashioned way. And this is how it feels to build websites with Duda, the website builder designed for This is how it feels to build websites with Duda, the website builder designed for...
Мы работаем для тех, кто не хочет отставать от времени. Смотрим 60 минут на платформе смотрим.ру. Просто наведите камеру смартфона или планшета на QR-код и смотрите 60 минут, когда вам удобно. Украина попросила Турцию продать еще байрактаров. Об этом сообщает администрация президента Турции. Сам Эрдоган сегодня в Киеве. Первые кадры на ваших экранах. Встречают хлебом и солью. Впереди встреча с Зеленским. Ну а Шойгу сегодня у Лукашенко. Смотрите.
Январь месяц заставил нас начать все эти учения, проверки и совместную работу гораздо раньше. И это был Казахстан. И, конечно, благодаря той оперативной работе наших президентов, и вас, и
this large prostate situation is extremely common. As the man ages, 1 out of 2, that's 50%, will get a large prostate. And this is called benign prostatic hyperplasia, which basically means an enlarged prostate. Now, before I get into what to do, because this is actually not a terribly complex problem if you understand it, and also there's a great solution, which I'm going to get to, but I want to just first differentiate what is the difference between BPH and cancer of the prostate. Are they similar? They're not too similar, in fact, they're pretty different. In cancer, you have these normal cells that then get damaged, specifically the mitochondria, and then they switch over to cancer cells, okay? And so with prostate cancer, that can spread through the body, and it can kill you. It's very deadly. But with BPH, it's benign, which means it's not going to spread. It's not going to turn into cancer. It is not deadly. Now, with the symptoms of prostate cancer, you're going to get blood in the urine, you're going to get blood in the semen, you're going to have painful urination, you're going to have a difficult time with an erection, you may have pain with ejaculation, and so the symptoms are very different than BPH, where really this involves just the urinary tract mostly. You're going to get up to the night and want to urinate. You may have the urge to urinate but can't urinate, or you can't fully eliminate the bladder, so it's a bit incomplete. So with BPH, you just have a lot of different urination issues, simply because the prostate is a gland and it wraps around the urethra, which is a little tube from your urinary bladder that comes out through your penis. And as the prostate enlarges, it obstructs the tube, and you're not able to fully eliminate freely all the urine that's supposed to come out through the urinary bladder. So you're going to start and stop and start and stop and have dribbling and all sorts of issues. But the prostate should only be the size of a walnut, but it can actually get quite large. Now, with the prostate cancer, a big question is, will phytonutrients, specifically phytoestrogens, make things worse? There are certain compounds in herbs and vegetables that mimic estrogens. Okay, they're called phytoestrogens. And we know estrogen dominance in general can cause cancer in women, breast cancer, and also in men as well. And a lot of the chemicals in the environment mimic estrogen, like the pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, heavy metals. They're all considered estrogen disruptors or endocrine disruptors. But when we get to plant-based estrogens, like phytoestrogens, there's a couple things you need to know. With phytoestrogens, you can prevent prostate cancer. You can slow down the progression if you have prostate cancer in the early stages. But if you're in a stage 3 or 4 or more, you may want to hesitate, because there is some data that these phytoestrogens can actually make things worse. But I want to make a side note. The studies that I read on this were relating to castrated males. So if someone's castrated and they have advanced stages of cancer, they should not consume any phytoestrogens, even in small amounts, because it can make things worse. However, the purpose of this video is to focus more on enlarged prostate. So let's talk about that. So there's two main theories about why men develop a benign prostatic hyperplasia. And based on all the data that I've read, I think both of these theories are true, and they both work together. The first theory has to do with as a man ages, okay, their testosterone goes down. And both men and women have both testosterone and estrogen. And so as a man ages, as their testosterone goes down, their estrogen goes up in relationship. So they have this ratio of lowered testosterone and higher estrogen. That's what occurs with aging. And if anything can be said about BPH, it is that it's involved with aging, factors in aging. So number one, we have lower testosterone and higher levels of estrogen. And estrogen makes things grow, especially the prostate. Estrogen also can cause your pituitary to trigger another hormone called prolactin that can also enlarge the prostate. As one ages, many times they gain more weight, they have more fat, and the more fat you have, the more estrogen you're going to have too, because there's a certain enzyme that will convert your testosterone to estrogen. And that enzyme is called aromatase, and this happens in both men and women. And if your liver's in damage, let's say it's inflamed, let's say you have a fatty liver, or you have cirrhosis, scar tissue of the liver, you're going to generate more estrogen. And I'm sorry to have to tell you this if you like to drink beer, but alcohol, especially beer, will affect the liver in that you're going to raise your estrogen levels a lot higher than your testosterone. So alcohol in general lower your testosterone and raise your estrogen. Okay, the other thing that I want to mention, and this is important to understand. There's 3 types of estrogen, okay? You got estrogen 1, 2, and 3. And these estrogens out there, they kind of connect to these little receptors, okay, in different parts of the body. It's only the estrogen 2 that can enlarge the prostate, not estrogen 1 or estrogen 3. And all those phytoestrogens, those plant-based compounds that affect estrogen, only affect estrogen number 1, not 2, not 3. So phytoestrogens do not enlarge the prostate. However, they do attempt to go into the receptors in estrogen 2 and end up blocking them, so other types of estrogen cannot create the effect. So they help lower the estrogen 2, which indirectly protects you against this prostate enlargement problem. So when you hear all this information out there about plant-based estrogens enlarging your prostate, it's absolutely not true. It's not going to happen. All right, the second part of this puzzle involves testosterone. As your testosterone decreases, we also have a powerful form of testosterone called DHT. Okay? That increases. DHT is responsible for hair loss. It's also responsible for the enlargement of your prostate. So, as you age, you have lower testosterone and higher levels of DHT. Those people that have genetic problems where they can't make DHT never develop an enlarged prostate. So the question is, what's making more of its DHT? Well, this relates to another enzyme. Okay, the name of that enzyme is called 5-alpha reductase. And if you have too much of that enzyme, you're going to get too much DHT, and that could potentially enlarge your prostate. All right, so now that we know both mechanisms, what can we do about it? Okay. Well, the first strategy is to start consuming more phytoestrogens. Okay, that's going to help you. And there's a real common one called Genistein that a lot of people take for an enlarged prostate. And Genistein is a phytoestrogen that's in a lot of legumes. It's in a lot of different things. And that can help with this enlarged prostate. The next thing is cruciferous vegetables: kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. All increase the amount of phytoestrogen in the body. So you should start eating those foods on a regular time. You're going to get too much DHT, and that could potentially enlarge your prostate. All right, so now that you know both mechanisms, what can we do about it? Okay. Well, the first strategy is to start consuming more phytoestrogens. Okay? That's going to help you. And there's a real common one called Genistein that a lot of people take for an enlarged prostate. And Genistein is a phytoestrogen that's in a lot of legumes. It's in a lot of different things. And that can help with this enlarged prostate. The next thing is cruciferous vegetables: kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. All increase the amount of phytoestrogen in the body. So you should start eating those foods on a regular basis. They will not increase the estrogen number 2. They'll block it to prevent other things from entering into that receptor that can cause enlarged prostate. Now, the next two strategies involve blocking those two enzymes. One of the enzymes is called aromatase, and that's the one that converts testosterone into estrogen, okay? And that's in your fat cells, it's in other cells. And so you want to take aromatase inhibitors, okay? Now, certain medications for the prostate do it synthetically. I recommend doing the natural versions of that. And believe it or not, I released a video recently by blending the entire lemon, the lemon peel, the white part, the seeds, everything, every morning with some stevia, and you blend it in some water and drink that. Apparently citrus peels, okay, from lemons and limes can act as an aromatase inhibitor. So if you haven't seen that video, I put it down below. It's a real easy thing to do, and it'll also give you a lot of vitamin C and other things as well. Another really powerful aromatase inhibitor is stinging nettle root. I like stinging nettle root a lot because it's a great anti-inflammatory as well. So if you have arthritis, definitely want to take that one. And then the other one is DIM. Okay, DIM is a concentrated cruciferous compound that you can take as a supplement and greatly help in the balance of excessive amounts of estrogen. And then the third category is to block the other enzyme called 5-alpha reductase. And so you want to inhibit that enzyme. And that would be by taking saw palmetto, which you probably already heard that's good for the prostate. Also, pumpkin seeds will help reduce that enzyme. And green tea will reduce that enzyme. And zinc will help reduce that enzyme. So now you know why it works. But on the flip side, you also want to avoid certain things too. High levels of insulin can act as a growth factor for your prostate. So you definitely need to go low carb, as well as doing intermittent fasting. I would also avoid dairy products because dairy has some estrogen compounds. And you may have already connected the dots between times that you, for supper, had more dairy, and then that night you're getting up having more urination problems or having problems voiding. So dairy is a factor. Then we have alcohol. Okay, if you want a good alternative to alcohol, I would try kombucha tea. It's similar in texture to beer, and it gives you a nice relaxation effect. Now the other point I'm going to bring up is plastics. I've done a whole video on this, but unfortunately the plastics in our environment are mimicking estrogen and creating some serious problems, especially with an enlarged prostate. An average person in the US consumes the amount of nanoplastics that would equal the size of a credit card. So I do have a video on that, and I put that down below as well. If you're drinking water and without a filter, like tap water, you're going to be getting a lot of compounds that mimic estrogen as well, especially those plastics. So you want to get a water filter for your house. And then you have the hormones in the foods, right? So if you're not consuming many organic foods and you eat out at a fast food restaurant, you're getting a lot of hormones that are coming from the animal products that are being mimicked from the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, things like that. Now, as a really simple thing that you can do right off the bat is to start including whole lemons, okay, in the blender with water every time you get up in the morning. If you haven't seen that video, I'm going to put it up right here. Check it out.
О, закажи в ленте.
Товары для дома со скидкой до 75%.
Мы работаем для тех, кто не хочет отставать от времени. Ведь совпадение с визитом министра обороны России Шойгу. В эти самые минуты он встречается с Лукашенко. Первое заявление уже прозвучало. Я процитирую, это имеет значение. Полезут, получат. Вот и вся война. В общем, новостей сегодня столько, и они все настолько тревожные, что захватывает дух. Киев стянул к линии фронта на Донбассе практически уже всю свою армию. Джонсон, как мы с вами запомнили,